So why don't we take a look at the binder. Now there is tons of notes in here that I had made over the course of the game. And before we start looking at that too much, I did want to go back really quick to Diablo II The Awakening at least. They had all 16 dungeon levels of the monastery in Diablo 1 mapped out. Of course, if you use this version, it's not compatible with the basic set where you had the random generated dungeons with those dungeon tiles. So, like, you know, you got the maps of the labyrinth for every dungeon level. And we started out pretty standard. It was basically, we were playing through the Diablo 1 game, but at a tabletop, right down to a lot of the dialogue, which the book does a lot of the transcribing for itself, and I made sure to include bits that were, you know, from the game that weren't included in here too. So, you know, it was basically just the same thing we had already played on the computer, the tabletop. And for a point, people didn't mind. I was the hack and slash game. When people wanted to fight stuff, they, you know, wanted to play Diablo. Whereas my brother's Greyhawk campaign had a little bit more variety, which definitely combined with my older sister's campaign that she was running. Like I said, we played with our siblings mostly, which I know is weird for some people, but, you know, it was our group. They were, as Dungeon Masters, very inspirational to me, and definitely helped encourage me to expand my campaign and sort of create my own story to go along with it. But because of that, the characters that they played made it down to the third dungeon level, or level of the monastery, the third one of 16, before other adventures and quests took them out of the base town of Tristram and into a whole different alternate universe of the Diablo world that I had concocted, you know, at the ages of 13 and 14. So I sort of created my own canon. I started the campaign before I even had, you know, these 3rd edition books, and had not played Diablo II. I actually didn't get to play the second game for years after it came out, because when it did come out, it was one of the first releases of a computer game that just did not run on the family computer, and we really couldn't afford to upgrade at the time or get a new one. So it was years and years before I actually got to play Diablo II the game. So I had no idea what actually happened in Diablo II when I started expanding my world. So I really had to kind of make some things up as I went along, which eventually started to kind of contradict the canon, but hey, you know, who cares? I was having fun. So, excuse me. Oh, the rambling makes me thirsty. Okay. So, they didn't make it very far in the actual story, as I said. I started bringing in a whole side plot with like 2 warring tribes of barbarians, which was heavily inspired by Conan the Barbarian, which I had the movie on repeat a lot of the time when I'd be writing my notes. And yeah, it was the version recorded from like TBS or whatever. It was the edited version because I was, you know, 13, 14, and wasn't allowed to see the R-rated version of Conan yet. But I digress again. I sort of took it to my own places, definitely. So, let's have a look inside the binder here. Now, nothing's in particular order, so I apologize for the rambling nature of this, but that's kind of the point I want to do with these KalaVlogs, is just, you know, look at cool stuff, talk about cool stuff, and just sort of, you know, share stories, whatever. So, alrighty, so we have the player characters now. We got a Hadron Turk, also known as Forkbeard, and he was a warrior class, which was my renamed fighter class. That was my brother's character. And he was this really, really, really gruff, chaotic, neutral, unpredictable sort of just raging warrior guy with this really lethal broadsword, which is a weapon they got rid of in 3rd edition D&D, excluding Diablo, which is kind of weird because, you know, it used to be kind of a, at least from my recollection, a really common one in 2nd edition. But he was the son of this barbarian warlord that didn't have a name at the time. He just had this huge red beard. We called him Redbeard. Now all I can see is Tormund from Game of Thrones now. But I eventually named him Gorgrin Scarred. And but that came much later when I recreated him for my Skyrim character. So a lot of this stuff that I did for this campaign will crop up in other things I do, whether it's, you know, I name a computer or video game character after them, or in some cases, in the D&D games I run with my wife, because she was never part of this, I will transplant favorite things over from other campaigns, which, you know, if you're going to run more than one campaign as a DM, if there's something you really, really like that you didn't get to fully explore or have around as much as you were hoping, by all means, I think you should be allowed to reuse it. It's fun. But, yeah, his warlord father, Redbeard, was responsible for destroying and sacking the village of my sister's character here, Kaisha Wolfsmane, from the southern barbarians, which, to my knowledge, do not exist in Diablo at all. They all come from the north, which is where I had Redbeard come from. And she was a cool character. I know she borrowed a lot of inspiration from the Chae-Su Lee novels. Jennifer Roberson, I think, wrote those. You guys are welcome to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. A cool series of fantasy novels, and she, I know, incorporated their language into her characters to sort of have that be the barbarian's language, because I believe she was already pretty acquainted with it from running her own D&D games based off of those books. So, and you know, it worked pretty well. I thought it was pretty cool. Like here, yeah, Subduing Bastard Sword, Brutal Battle Axe, Armor of the Jackal, Large Axe of Quickness. See, like those unique items in the Diablo games, the ones that are either like blue or red, or, you know, even gold, are the really unique ones. Yeah, my brother's character, Turk here, he's got, you know, Warhammer of the Flame. And I used to, you know, be one of those DMs as a kid who would just throw out the treasure. I mean, magical items left and right, which I guess kind of works with Diablo, especially Diablo 1 and 2, where you were getting magic items left and right. But also, I'm looking at their levels, and they're all like level 3 and level 4. And I mean, that sounds about right. If you're just taking into account the 3 of 16 dungeons that they actually managed to traverse. But if you take into account all of the extra story stuff I had, I probably was not awarding experience points correctly. I mean, yeah, they would be much higher level than that. But, I don't know. I've been told I can be a bit stingy, which I hope isn't true. I know in the Pathfinder book, if I can digress for a second, for awarding experience, which is basically the points that you get for whether, you know, defeating monsters, finding treasures, solving puzzles, you know, disarming traps, achievements. For those of you who don't really know much about D&D jargon, and I probably have already gone over your heads a lot already, but I'm going to assume that a lot of people watching this, if any of you actually have stuck with me this far, are aware of the basic lingo. So, moving on. I've got one more character here. This is my sister-in-law's, because it was my brother, my sister-in-law, and my sister played. And I think they had fun in spite of the fact that I was only 13, and I mean, I'm sure there are other DMs who start that young, but certainly run much more enjoyable games now, I'd like to say. But I think for what it was, I did a pretty good job. So yeah, we have the last character, Zara the Sorceress. And she was from, like, the deserty region of, I think it's Curast. That could be the jungle region. But it's the eastern part of the world, far away. At the time, I made it very, like, Arabian Nights sort of flavored. And that's where she came from. But I also made her connected to the town that the dungeon is beneath, and that like one of her parents used to live there or something. She was really connected to the backstory of Diablo's rise to power in the labyrinth beneath Tristram, which I should probably run through the basic story of Diablo, at least the first game, which the manual I have back here for the game actually has a lot of text, kind of like the Warcraft ones do, with lore and whatnot. But the basic gist is, you know, it's your standard classic medieval village, but it's really kind of run down and spooky, and that's because this massive monastery, which used to be the seat of power for this king, has basically turned to evil. The king discovered... well, the king didn't discover, but his like advisor discovered a soul stone deep in the like catacombs below this monastery. And a soul stone is basically a magic stone which can contain the soul or essence of a powerful being. In this case, there was a great civil war in hell, where the three primevals, Diablo, and then Baal and Mephisto, who are the villains that they add more or less, or you actually encounter in the second game. But Diablo was trapped by this order of wizards, basically called the Haradrim, and it was their job to hunt down and trap these prime evils who had been banished by their lessers for losing the civil war in hell to Earth, basically. And these Haradrim wizards had to capture them in the Soul Stones so that, you know, they would be trapped. Because they couldn't destroy them, but they could capture them in the Soul Stones and then hide those, you know, where no one would find them. But of course somebody found one. You can guess how things turned out from there, I suppose. Diablo was able to exert his will through the Soul Stone, and basically the advisor, the Archbishop, Lazarus, ended up being his puppet, and sort of Grima Wormtongue whispered, you know, into the king's ear, and over time the king grew mad, and sent his armies, you know, to war against his own people, and it was this crazy thing. And then the king's son, the prince, was kidnapped by the Archbishop, and basically given to Diablo as a mortal vessel. So Diablo is able to... this is actually really cool and really dark, but exert his will to basically get the prince to spike the soul stone, because it's pointy at the end. It's like a kind of a wedge into his forehead, which then basically allows Diablo to possess the kid, and he basically bulks up and turns into this guy right here. And that's your villain for the game at the very bottom of the dungeon, which is, you know, I said there were 16 levels, which the deeper you go, the nastier things get. You know, the top part is just, you know, the monastery levels, and then you have the catacombs and the caves, and then eventually you dig your way down basically to hell itself, where you face Diablo in a, you know, a really hard battle, if I recall. We had so much trouble defeating the first Diablo game. The second one I actually thought was easier in a way, but more enjoyable too, which is a story for another day. But anyways, I believe my sister-in-law's character Zara was tied to that whole backstory in that kingdom, and had some sort of like special destiny. I don't know. I kind of favored Zara, didn't I? Anyways, I think the main reason for that is I created this nasty villain, heavily inspired by Jafar from Aladdin and Vizier al-Hazred from King's Quest VI. Speaking of evil advisors, I guess, right? His name was Salak, which is the name I actually ripped off from the Ewok movies. But, which I should review sometime. That would be fun. They're interesting. I was really excited about Salak, and I never got to use him the way I wanted, but he has, in one way or another, sort of transplanted himself throughout various campaigns that I've run, just because, you know, I don't know, I just think he's a cool villain, and I want to use him. Let's see, what sort of magical items does Zara have? Let's see. Awesome robes. Those robes are awesome. Awesome robes plus 4. So really awesome robes. 4 times the awesome. The Staff of Fireball, a composite staff, and the Staff of Frost, so she had fire and ice at her command. Oh, and a short sword of venom, too. Oh, and she's a member of the Vizjeri. I'm butchering it. I know the games say how to pronounce it, but it was never said in the first Diablo game. So when I was reading all about it, I said it my own way. And I don't believe that's the right way, but it sort of stuck, which I'm not the only one who has trouble with stuff like that. Like, in old Dungeons & Dragons Greyhawk campaign notes, the pronunciations for the cosmology, the different gods, a lot of us got wrong in the past. Back when we were doing our Greyhawk campaign, that's the one my brother ran. And later on we learned the right pronunciations. Of course we were wrong, but I think I've gotten pretty good at switching over, because if I'm going to say it, I'd like to say it right. But sometimes it just sticks, and you say it one way no matter how many times you try to convince yourself that it's another. Like the D&D god Pelor, we always called him Pelor, but it's Pelor. They even got it wrong in the third D&D movie, which is awful, by the way. They called it Pelor in that, too. So, I guess, we're not the only ones, like I said. Okay, so, as I said, I had my own storylines that I was doing separate from the main ones, and I used to keep my notes pretty organized back then. All handwritten, notes on line paper, which nowadays, for the campaign I run, it's all done digitally. I've gotten so lazy, but it's so much easier just to type your notes in a Word file and have your laptop in front of you. And it sort of acts as a DM screen that way, too. It's handy, and I like to use music when I Dungeon Master, usually from movie or video game soundtracks, but some sort of score in the background. And I like also being able to switch between music scores on the computer for dramatic effect or whatever you want to do. I think it's handy. But, Selec the Sorcerer. Let's see. We can look at some of the character sheets, too, for the NPCs I made. I know the character Ardith Bay from the Mummy movies. I basically put him in the Diablo game because I thought he was really cool. And he's the brother of Zara, again. But I really favor Zara because I had the, families figured out for everybody. My sister's barbarian from the south, the one who my brother's father wiped out most of the family of. She had her brother, who was basically the default barbarian from Diablo II. And I did the whole, family sword thing like in Conan, how Conan's father had that sword, which I think the villain Rexor took and wielded until Conan got it back. Things like that, the family sword and the riddle of steel. I tried to infuse a lot of that stuff into it because I was so into Conan at the time. And in fact, the soundtrack we used, because I didn't have the Diablo music, we used whenever we played, was the Conan the Barbarian soundtrack, which is, by the way, in my opinion, one of the best movie soundtracks ever, hands down. And I actually plan on one day doing a video about my favorite movie scores, or at least the movie scores I'm currently into at the time that I make it, just sort of what I'm listening to, things that I really like, and so on. So, have that to look forward to eventually, too, hopefully, if I get around to it. So anyway, Selec the Sorcerer, the father of Zara and Ardith, has many plans. One of which is to find the legendary World Stone. See, that is from Diablo II, and by this point, because this is later notes I did shortly before the campaign ended, I knew the story of Diablo II a little better, even though I still hadn't played it. This book right here, Diablo II to Hell and Back, covers all the major events in the second Diablo game, and I was able to draw from that later on. Yeah, he wanted to find the World Stone and use its powers to his advantage, of course. Take over the world. He also wishes to have his daughter killed. That's not very nice. For it is not only prophesied that only she can bring about his downfall. See, I use that old trope. She's the only one who can kill him, prophesies to be so. Not only that, but that she could also prove a serious threat once her sorceress abilities are fully honed, knowing full well that she would never join him. He also plans to take over the Eastern Empires while he's at it, and rule in a new age of glory. I really built it up. Where all will pay allegiance to the new Lord of Darkness. ... Him. Oh, and then we have the Westmarchian Princess. Gosh, you know, she was a very annoying character. I would not create, I don't think, a character and make her so... I don't know. She was... Yeah, I guess, you know, I don't always see anything wrong with Mary Sue characters, depending on the context, but I don't know. She was just very princessy in almost a stereotypical way. But they found her, they rescued her from some minions of the lesser demon Andario, the Maiden of Anguish, and she was basically trying to follow in the footsteps of the prime evils who, you know, she partially was responsible for banishing to the world of Condurus, which is a kingdom in the world of Diablo, but at the time that's what I thought the world was called, because never once in any of these Diablo 1 or 2 books that I have does it actually list the world's actual name, Sanctuary, which I actually, you know, it's probably existed in the lore long before Diablo 3, but I never heard of it being called Sanctuary, I don't think, until Diablo 3, but I could be wrong. But, basically, Andario was going to try and possess the princess, but the heroes were able to stop this, the ritual, and so Andario failed to possess the princess, but it had a side effect where the princess was now an amnesiac, which is always fun. I actually have an amnesiac character in my new campaign I'm running with my wife, which is much better done, I think, I would say. Let's see. Yeah, and she had this Westmarchian paladin, Eric the Paladin, who is another Eric the Paladin or Eric the Knight, has existed in my fantasy stories I've been inventing since I was a wee lad. And he's reappeared in various different incarnations as well. So much so that I've actually considered not bringing him back in my newest campaign, just because I've used him so much, and he's really not that interesting. I think I did a better job in later versions than the one here in the Diablo game, because the one here that I have is what one of my favorite internet personalities, the Spoony one, would say, rather than lawful good, he's lawful stupid. He is such a Boy Scout that it becomes not only annoying, but impractical, I guess. So, then that was very much Eric in the Diablo game that I ran, for sure. And then back to Redbeard. I originally created him to be the big bad. This is before I created Salik that I was talking about earlier. But he ended up turning out to be kind of more of a gray area character, and in fact ended up becoming an ally of the heroes, because what ended up happening, rather than like in the Diablo 1 game, where they would go through in a band in each level of the dungeon and just take out, you know, demon after demon. They'll basically take care of it all themselves. In this version, the heroes decided to go and get outside help. I mean, they weren't just going to go like an adventuring party down to the bottom until, you know, the deed was done and Diablo was defeated. They were going to put together an army and march against the forces of hell. So that ended up being the dominating storyline, with everything about the Labyrinth or Twistrum or even the Diablo storyline kind of being pushed to the wayside, and it ceased to be regular Diablo and kind of became a new thing altogether. And that's where a lot of this side stuff that I'm sharing with you guys comes in. So he had this huge army of barbarians he was marching with, and they got him to agree to help them, and they did the same with what was left of the southern barbarians. They sort of built themselves back up after being wiped out when my sister's character was just a kid. And they were, you know, arch enemies, practically. They managed to convince those two enemies to work together, for the greater common good of taking on Diablo and the other primevals. And even Salik, I think, came into those plans eventually. Once he was created, he became a known enemy that they'd have to fight. So, yeah. The Westmarchian princess, the one with the amnesia, she eventually did get her memory back. I believe. No, she didn't. I was going to. I had like a quest ready where they would be able to get it back, but I don't think they had ever finished it. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, that quest where they're gathering the different armies, I call it the Alliance Against Hell. Yeah, they got the Westmarchians, which were that region's also detailed in Diablo II. But I only knew it by like vague reference in the Diablo 1 manual for the computer game, so my version of Westmarch turned out very different than the one we finally got to visit, in the expansion to Diablo 3, which was great, and I was really excited to see it. Even if it was totally different than what I did here, you know. They had their help, you know, King Ragnar, a totally made-up character of mine, was the ailing, dying on his deathbed king of Westmarch, and right before we left off in the campaign, sort of slipped into limbo and then eventually died. I think he finally died himself, and the princess was going to be taking over. But they had the support of the Westmarchians. One of the other NPCs in the party, there were a couple. We'll get to them. She was a rogue from the Sisters of the Sightless Eye, which is like this almost monastic order of roguish women, generally archers, and she was one of them. Her name was Thena, and she had went to them, and they pledged their support, which I believe at this time in the official Diablo timeline, a lot of these factions have already kind of been wiped out or already fallen into their own sorts of corruptions. But either I didn't know that, or I just wanted to take it in a different direction. I think it was a bit of both. It just kind of, my imagination ran away with me, and I just kept, writing notes and creating stuff. So they had the Sisters of the Sightless Eye, and also the Necromancers of the Southern Swamps to help them. So they only had two factions that I had included in the story. The Sorcerers and the Amazons still had to be recruited, and then they were going to go back to the dungeon, this time with an army, which I don't know how I was planning on executing all of that, and basically just wreak havoc on the forces of hell. Of course, I had other plans in mind too, where Salik was going to bring in his own army and sort of cause problems with that, which probably would have ended up forcing the heroes to go down into the dungeon themselves without the army anyways. So it was kind of a mean, forceful trick, one that I probably wouldn't use now, but I know that's what I was planning, just because I couldn't even then logistically figure out how to get an army into, these more compact dungeons. That would have had to have been a battle being fought up above. Kind of like Lord of the Rings, where all of the free peoples that are left near the very end of Return of the King ride to the Black Gate to sort of distract Sauron, to buy Frodo and Sam a little bit more time to destroy the ring. It was sort of going to be like that. We'll keep the bigger armies at bay up here while, you heroes go down and do what has to be done. So. Oh, apparently they could cure Alexander's amnesia with the help of a potion of full chi. I don't know where they would have gotten that. Maybe from the witch Adria, which is a cool character that I'm glad they fleshed out more on in future Diablo stuff. And I also was really into, near the second half, after that year-long hiatus, near that second half of the Diablo game, I was really into the anime Slayers, which is a really, really goofy, comical, not serious at all anime series. And a couple of my favorite characters from it I also adapted into the Diablo game, which is kind of dumb. Really dumb if you think about it, because their personalities were still pretty much intact from Slayers. One of them I toned down, but one of them, who is an outlandish character anyways. Definitely stayed outlandish. And that would be Zelos, the Great or Mysterious Priest. Whose answer to pretty much everything is, that is a secret. Which, if my wife were here, she'd say the Japanese version and correct me, because I'm one of the few weird people who actually like the American voice cast of Slayers better than the Japanese one. I know, it's sacrilege to a lot of, you know, true anime fans. Those of us who watch it in, you know, with not with subtitles. Those of us who choose to watch it dubbed rather than subtitles. Oh, shame on us, man. We're not true anime fans. But anyways, I have Zelos in here. But I made him a demon servant of Baal. Which, in the show, Slayers, it's no secret that he's got a questionable allegiances. But he's one of those characters who will help the good guys as much as he might undermine them as well. He's really kind of in it for his own gain and sort of has his own plan of what he's doing. Yeah, and he's basically searching the world for the World Stone for Baal, who I believe in the technical canon is also trapped in a Soul Stone at this point, like Diablo was before the prince allowed him to be possessed by Diablo. But I believe I changed it to where he was already free, which is why he had Zelos sort of interacting with the players, and also trying to steer them away from the catacombs, the monastery, as well, because Baal and Diablo are allies, right? So he's trying to dissuade the players from actually doing the killing Diablo part that they're trying to do. Which I don't know if the players ever caught on or not. In fact, they're probably learning some things, if you guys are watching this, that you didn't know. Because the campaign's over, I can talk about these things. And, you know, there's a lot of secrets that I probably forgotten about, or won't even mention now. But I had a lot planned, and I had a lot more time on my hands at the time to plan it. So, it's kind of sad that it didn't happen. But at the same time, a lot of it was pretty dumb, I think, by what my standards are today for what I would put out as a DM or what I would do. Let's see, and then yeah, Zangulus the Bounty Hunter was the other character, and he's basically the same character. The humor's dialed down a little bit, but he's basically hunting the players. I can't remember who paid him to do it. Probably Salik, who they had never did meet in the game that, up to the point that we got to play. But I feel like it did a good job establishing him as this presence that the heroes would eventually have to face. It's just it never got that payoff that it deserved. So, and I used to have stacks of these notes. I don't know where all of them have gone, but I could, you know, once again just keep chatting about it. There's so much in here, and I mean, if you're only interested in the stuff about the books and the rules, that's cool. If you're even half interested, I would recommend checking out Amazon or eBay online. I was looking earlier today, and they didn't really look like they were that expensive. And I don't know how well they really went over either, the Diablo D&D stuff. But I know I've met quite a few people who are Blizzard and Diablo fans and do play D&D who were not aware that there was a Diablo version, and a lot of that has to do with them. Many of them are started with 4th or 5th edition, or a bit younger than me, and just, you know, didn't know. Or maybe they started playing with Diablo 3, and, you know, it's just a generation gap. So, you know, it's a cool thing to check out and look out for. Another character I had created, which was all my own creation, was a vampire. I brought vampires into it as well. And, you know, I think, yeah, on the internet I found rules for running vampires in the style of the Anne Rice novels, which by that point I was aware of, and a fan of through the movies more than the actual, like, books, because I haven't read the books, which I know are apparently way better, which is usually the case, but, yeah. Which reminds me, I think I was about 17 years old the last time we played this. So there was a year gap when we all moved, but then the amounts of times that we played over the next few years, like, I tried to keep it going for as long as I could, but we would maybe get, like, one session every half year or something crazy like that. So, which is what sort of happened with a lot of the other sessions, too. You know, which just happens sometimes. It's fun we're actually got games running now, totally new games, which seem to be doing pretty well. And those are the most consistent I've had a D&D or just tabletop role-playing game, campaign, or campaigns in this case, go in a long time. Once again, it's not a very large group, but, you know, I would like to eventually run a game, even, you know, at my school or something, but just like a quick one-shot would be a lot of fun to do with some of my bow friends. So, you know, any of you guys who are watching, I have no idea when I would have the time to do it. I barely have the time to run the game that I run for my wife, which she would be really sad if I didn't keep that going. But I just love playing D&D and have for, gosh, well, like I said, the first campaign that I was ever a part of, I was like 10. The one that one that actually endured. So, yeah, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons one way or another for almost 19 years, which makes me feel a bit old. But I know I'm not old. People who are older than me will be like, "You're not old, I'm old," and everybody hates that. But yeah, it's a long time to be playing D&D, and I've had a lot of fun. It's a great game, especially if you're the right side of the brain type of people. Although, you know, like me, the more creative, less logical types, like I suck at math. But at the same time, I've known players who are very much left brain, mathematical people, and they're the ones who are really good, especially as dungeon masters, in terms of being able to keep track of all the numbers. Because there's a lot of math in D&D, but luckily it's simple enough of math that I can get by without stressing too much. But, yeah, I'm rambling on, totally going off topic, and just geeking out over D&D now. But yeah, vampires, right? I had Tanya Aladima. So, which, by the way, she looked like Angelina Jolie, because at the time, you know, I was a bit obsessed. So, she was one of my first, not my first, but one of my first celebrity crushes. And, yeah, I was very into Angie Jolie when I was, you know, like right around 14, 15, 16 years old, that block of time. So, of course, my vampire had to look like her. And, Aladima, her last name is Amidala, from Star Wars prequel movies backwards. Padme Amidala. Amidala backwards is Aladima. And I, had this poster, the Star Wars poster, which had Padme on it, and it said, you know, Padme Amidala. And I'm always reading stuff backwards. This is a weird thing I do. I'll, like, make up my own language with it, which really amuses my son nowadays, especially, but my wife too, because I'm odd and people think it's funny. So I'm doing that all the time, and I know my brother's done it too, to make up a cool name. You know, it's really simple and kind of silly, but at the same time you can get some cool names that way. Like, I thought Aladima was pretty cool. Amidala backwards. And she was tied to one of the other NPCs in here, which we'll look at the character sheets pretty soon. Like I said, it's in no particular order, but she basically, the necromancer who trained the necromancer of the party, his sort of mentor, was a vampire, and she was the vampire who made him, and she was the real bad guy. She was very terrible, but also very cliche, sort of vampire seductress, evil woman. You know, I always imagined that her manservant that she had, Rufus, looked like, well, Rufus Sewell, the actor. So, you know, I tried really hard on his name, didn't I? So, he was sort of her, you know, her ghoul, if we're going to use, like, World of Darkness terms, which is, like, not a vampire, but a sort of supernatural servant of the vampire who guards them during the day, you know, while they're sleeping, the sleep of the dead. And then I also had Kanos the Thief. And he was the leader of the Thieves Guild in Westmarch City. And he was this kind of scurvy pirate. He didn't sound like a scurvy pirate, though. What you're going to notice when I talk about D&D games that I run, a lot of my NPCs I sort of assign a dream cast to, like an actor or an actress that I think would be perfect to play them. I'll cast their face to give me, as the DM, and also the players, as something to sort of go off on when I'm describing what the person they're interacting with looks like. So, like I mentioned, you know, Kanos was Gerard Butler, which most of you probably know who that is. Long before, like, 300 fame, though, I cast him as Kanos because, like I said, I was an Angelina Jolie fan. The second Tomb Raider movie, where he plays her, like, ex/current, like, Rocky history love interest, you know. So he had that, you know, Scottish accent, which I'm butchering here, but anyways. So yeah, he was not a good guy or a bad guy, you know, he was an outlaw, and the heroes were going to need to more or less recruit him, not to help him against Diablo, but so they could get a ship, because there wouldn't be any other ships brave enough to go out in the waters, because, you know, dangerous demonic things have been happening on the seas. So they were going to get this pirate guy, which this is all beyond where they finished playing. So I was going to have them recruit him to take them across the sea to Curest, where they would meet with sorcerers to help join the army that they would bring back to Tristram to go down into the monastery and fight Diablo. So there was him, and I reused him in my Forgotten Realms campaign, which was the first time I tried to run D&D for my wife when we were first living together. And even compared to that, I feel like I've learned and sort of changed my dungeon mastering style over time. I love a good melee. I love doing combat in D&D. I think it's a lot of fun, but my campaigns tend to be much more heavy on plot. Not like I'm dissing on people who... I'm not dissing on you guys who love the hack and slash, like, you know, trying to be like, oh, well, my campaign actually has plot. No. What I mean is, there are different types of D&D games for different types of gamers. Some want to kick down the door and kill them some kobolds, you know. But there's a lot of political intrigue and a lot of just characterization and role play. Several sessions can sometimes go before any combat is dealt, which is sort of the style I've been doing for my more recent campaign, which my wife and I sort of have been co-building the world for, in hopes that we can turn it into stories or comic books or something one day. Yeah, she's a comic book art major in college, and I'm majoring in film. So it's actually a serious thing we've talked about doing. In fact, she's even written a script for a comic based off of our world. But there we go again, rambling. So